All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Mitch Michals, Santa Monica Studios. You know the drill. It's another great edition of this show. And joined now by a friend of the program, one of my favorite guests, Emcee, host, journalist. A lot of accolades. I like this one especially. Former Conference USA Player of the Year at Rice. Blair Henley, welcome to the show. Welcome again.
Going deep into the archives for that one, Mitch. But thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I like that, and I like the fact that you're a proud tennis member of that family, and it's good because I think I saw something on social media where I do all my prepping for you, and that you had the team, you had the girls back again. And it's good when like it's just there's nothing beats that. Like I was a former hockey guy in my day. There's nothing when the band gets back together and you can just pick up where you left off with the stories, the inside jokes, the razzing, everything.
It never gets old. I actually devastatingly missed a little mini Rice tennis reunion at Indian Wells this year. When they decided they wanted to center it around a tennis event, I was happy for them and also knew that it was risky for me because my schedule, I feel like, is changing by the week. So very sad to have missed that, but I did not steer them wrong. I sent them to Stadium 3, which I still believe is the best court at the Indian Wells Tennis Garden. They had a great time. They wore their Rice shirts, but I was sad to miss it.
Yeah, it's it is. At Stadium 3, you can't beat it. And there was such a demand this year. It was just an insane event. Well, I want to start with this too. There's a lot of ways to go. We have to catch up on what you've been doing, the tennis storylines. But I just wanted to clarify. I wasn't sure when the chat started. I am talking to the Blair Henley, the tennis version, right?
Yes, Blair Henley, the tennis version. And for those who don't know what you're referencing, there is a Blair Henley from Fort Worth, which is where I live, who plays baseball and who just got called up to the major leagues for the first time the other night. I have been hearing about the other Blair Henley for literally 10 years because my husband played baseball. Rice baseball fans are like, hey, there's a young prospect coming up in Texas named Blair Henley. So I have been hearing about him for ages. I have met people in like random stores when I've been paying, like, oh, I know a guy named Blair Henley. So I have since struck up an Instagram friendship with said Blair Henley. One day we will meet in person. I know he didn't have the first outing that he hoped for, so here's to many, many more to the other Blair Henley. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. This Blair Henley plays for the Astros, just called up, was I believe at Texas, UT Austin. And it's great for him. It's great that there's another Blair Henley in the world. You guys can do the Spider-Man meme when you first meet up, but it is going to be tough for, Twitter searches and Getty images, but I think you can kind of manage that.
Probably for me. I think he'll be okay. I think I'm going to get the short end of that. But anyway, continue.
This is also a good time to catch up with you because I know what a whirlwind your tennis career is, right? From let's say February through just about now, through post Miami, post Houston, Billie Jean King Cup tie. This is right like your busy stretch of the tennis calendar.
It definitely is. So I did, as you said, well, beginning of the year, I did Dallas and then Delray, home for a couple of weeks. Miami, I did the Miami at the new site for the first time. I had never worked that tournament at the new site, which I didn't. I know everybody misses Key Biscayne, and I understand that sentiment having worked there as well. But there were things to like about the new place, the newer place, new to me. And then Houston, Billie Jean King Cup, a little Q&A with Andre Agassi, which was a total highlight that I didn't think was going to happen. That was sort of a last minute thing. And then got one more Savannah Challenger next week. And then I get to, go back to my day job, which is taking care of children.
Children and a hedgehog, yeah. But for those familiar with this show that keeps gaining steam. But yeah, I just have to remind new listeners that Blair is a proud owner of all those children and a hedgehog. So, it kind of started way back when in Dallas and then Delray, which I have to mention. Part of this podcast is going to be your insight to the players, but also the commentators. I got to meet and do a podcast with rising journalist herself, Abigail Johnson, and she spoke highly of that experience working in Delray and braving the conditions with you as two women working in tennis that had to deal with some of the elements in that tournament.
Oh, Delray. There's nothing quite like it. It's I think the players look upon it lovingly. It's just one of those events. It's easy to get to for most of them. it's at a time of the year that makes sense to go play on hard court somewhere. And it just, it's Florida. It's close to the coast. It's going to be windy. There's probably going to be rain. But listen, I will tell you, thank goodness we were in Delray Beach, because we ended up having a Monday final. And granted, it was President's Day, so it was packed. It was President's Day, so people had the day off. But regardless, I think anytime you have a Monday final, you expect it to perhaps not be full. Not a seat empty in the house. So the retirement community showed up big time on that Monday final. So thanks to Delray for many reasons, but that was one of them.
I'm thinking also about tennis karma and how the tennis gods have been maybe like making good on the past couple years in a couple different senses. But one being, you work these events, you worked Houston, Delray. These two finals this year, you had two top Americans in both finals for 250s. You had Paul versus Fritz in Delray, and you had Tiafoe versus Shelton in Houston. Given what especially Houston had last year where the tournament almost didn't get completed, that is a home run. That's a grand slam, if anything.
Yeah, it's been an embarrassment of riches for the American fans. And again, this is why I will go to bat for 250s any day, because we want American fans to care about the American players, and being able to see them up close and personal in those types of settings is huge in building that fan base. I know maybe Taylor Fritz has said at times, probably all the American guys, like I walk around in the US and nobody has any idea who I am. I think that is changing a little bit, but to me, having those sorts of results in the US has to help, just in general with tennis popularity and specifically with the Americans.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. There's pros and cons to it. I mean, we can kind of have this discussion now as part of it. I was planning to, but we can veer to it now, especially on the female side. I know so much is made about, what's happened with basketball with this Caitlin Clark phenomenon and everything. But the first thing you saw was what her salary is in the WNBA next a couple of years. And, it's modest for pro athletes. Tennis doesn't have that problem. Tennis on the female side, along with golf, it's where you can make a killing. And I know there's a lot of criticisms with tennis that are deservedly so, but I think it's also important to highlight the positives. Like, you can really make a name and make some serious money on the women's side.
Absolutely. And, it's a fine line, right? Because you don't want to settle. Like, push for more, push for, opening doors and new opportunities and having tennis seen in a different light. You always want to be pushing for more. But, and I don't always mean financially, but in this case, since we're talking about finances, I think it's always good to be pushing for more, bigger and better. But I think it's a good reminder for those of us who work in tennis, maybe even for the tennis players, that, gosh, like the path, the foundation that has been laid was really strong. And the players in the decades since, the original 9 have really done a great job at helping to build. But I do think it's really easy to lose sight of the fact that back then, in the original 9 days, those players were so involved in marketing the sports. And I think tennis and the team atmosphere of tennis can be so insular that it's so easy. And it would be it's a natural progression that you stop looking outward and you become so focused inward. And I think it possibly can have negative effects overall.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point you bring up. And it's also worth noting, you can take this away from the tennis sphere. It's okay to also keep striving for more, but appreciate victories and appreciate, progress, even if it's slow. In that nature, I mean, going back to Miami, we're bouncing around here, but you get to cover the tournament. How surprised are you with this, or how believable is this in your mind, this Danimal run? Because you were at Miami and Danielle Collins wins that, and now she's like the hottest player on tour in her final season. Where are you at, someone that's gotten to know her a little bit, with what Danielle Collins is doing?
Well, I am proud to say that my stage manager in Miami, who is far more of a tennis nerd than I am, which is saying something, he showed me, I think it was round of 16, the women who were left, the list of the women who were left. And he's like, who do you think's going to win it? I was like, Danielle Collins. It just, because she is one of those players who can come up with that. She is outside looking in, and if you saw the final points as she was trying to close it out, you know that nobody is truly fearless. But she appears fearless outside looking in. And that is what it takes to have, not look at your ranking and be like, I'm not supposed to be at this point in a 1000 tournament, to not look around, to be able to keep the blinders on and keep the run going. That just takes a special kind of athlete in the mental sense. And I think that's what she is. And we know that she can absolutely hit anyone off the court. I think she's a smart player also. But I asked her on the court, I only had her on my court once. And I did try to get that out of her. I'm trying to remember, that was probably maybe second or third round that she was on my court. But I said, because you have said I'm done at the end of this year, has it freed you up? And she was non-committal. Well, maybe, I don't know. But I do think there's something to that. And man, was it fun to watch.
Yeah, what would you, if we're playing, the tennis cliche, or if someone, some of the adult fans out there are playing a tennis drinking game, one of the phrases would be like, plays the match on your own terms. But honestly,
Yes.
that's kind of how I look. That's how I look at her in a lot of that sense, is that win or lose, game point, championship point, biggest tournament of your life, she's still just going to go for her shots, and she might miss it. She has in the past, but there is something special about the player that just won't back down from playing her game. I also think it's worth noting that we're starting to see more of it. You've gotten more of a firsthand look at this, that there's a difference between on-court persona and what the person is off the court, and the personality. How has that transformation, or in the public eye, because it's always been there, how has Danielle Collins being able to show her personality been from your vantage point?
The best thing ever. As anybody who knows me knows, when it comes to tennis players, the more personality, the better. Emma Navarro rapping as a rookie at the Billie Jean King Cup dinner, greatest thing ever. And I know she had mixed feelings on it, and I get that. Like, you're putting yourself out there in a way that maybe you haven't before, but that for a lot of people was the first not zoned in piece of Emma Navarro they've ever seen. It was incredibly endearing. I mean, by the end of, I'm veering off course here, but she's like a perfect case study in this. By the end of Billie Jean King Cup, Taylor Townsend was like, the bright spot for me was Emma Navarro. I didn't know the girl at all before this, and now I love her. And so I think the same goes for Danielle. We've gotten bits and pieces over the years. One of the things, just a little aside, that always makes me smile about Danielle is so often when she comes up to me for a post-match interview, and I have an IFB in my ear and somebody counting down to the interview, she will often point out, it's been my watch before in Miami. She was incredibly complimentary of my makeup, which was great because I've been outside for like 8 straight hours. So having somebody compliment that at that point in the day was very kind. But I'm about to miss my countdown. But she's like, are those eyelashes? Like, I love how you did your eyes. Anyway, couldn't be nicer and less concerned with what's actually happening on the tennis court. And I think that's part of what makes her so much fun as a person and as a tennis player, because yes, she's focused and intense and an incredible competitor, but on the flip side, she's all about living life. And I think her retirement decision kind of sums that whole thing up.
I agree with that completely. I think there is a switch, right, too. Like, you get on the court, you're a competitor. And I know some athletes struggle with this, some professionals struggle with this, not bringing their work home or turning it off, but she's shown a remarkable ability to do that. And I think part of it might be freed up by the fact that she knows that there's a finish line in sight. It's just special to see. It's always good to have, new storylines in tennis and new players step up. And she's certainly doing that. But kind of on the bigger point, and you mentioned it, and I want to give you credit here. Part of getting personality involved is unlocking it from our side, from the media, from people on the outside. And I think you're one of the better ones at doing that, and seeing that and seeing how that process works. If you could walk some of us through it here, how do you try to unlock personality when you're interviewing players, whether it's on court, whether it's in features? Because it's clearly working. We're seeing a side of players when they talk to you that we don't necessarily see otherwise.
Well, thank you. First of all, that's the nicest compliment. But I'll give you an example. In Miami, I had on my court for the very first time Tomas Mahach, who I had never spoken to in my life. I had never even seen in person before this match. Yeah. And it's after his win over Andy Murray. He had another 3-hour win before that. I am the worst. That's another thing about me. The absolute worst when it comes to remembering rounds and scores.
You're like, you go tournament mode. It's long, like these expanded draws now, especially. I get it. Like there's too much going on. You're locked.
Total amnesia once I leave a tournament site. But regardless, I have Tomas Mahach for the very first time on Grandstand in Miami, which, again, you know I have an affinity for Stadium 3 at Indian Wells. Grandstand in Miami is intense. Like, the fans are into it. We had Chileans. I mean, we had the Czech fans out, tons of South American fans when we had Beatriz Haddad Maya on the court. Great atmosphere. But anyway, okay, I'm getting distracted. Tomas Mahach. We know that he has been a part of the short shorts discourse in men's tennis. Right. He has been one of the mentioned proponents of perhaps a shift in trend. Now, I will also say, yes, he's on the front lines. That's a great way to describe it. I will tell you, my dad has been telling me for, I'm going to go 25 years that short shorts are coming back. And he is thrilled to now say, see, I was right. It's happening. Like, it's actually happening. Like, we've had teases before with Rafa. Like, there have been times where Rafa shorts have been shorter. But my dad is thrilled that his, old school short shorts are apparently making a comeback. Tomas is part of that wave. And because I had never spoken to him before, I don't know. You don't really know. You don't know the personality. You don't know if that's something you can bring up in the interview. But those interviews aren't televised on Grandstand for the men. They are for the women, but not for the men because AT Media brings in their own reporters. So little more leeway, right? Because if something goes horribly wrong, at least the only people who see it are the people in the stadium. But before we went on mic, I walked up to Tomas, introduced myself. Hi, I'm Blair. So nice to meet you. We're going to be doing an interview in just a couple minutes. Quick question for you. If I were to joke about your shorts at the end of this interview, would that be okay with you? And he said, oh, sure. Go for it. And so we talk tennis for the first 3 questions. And my last question was along the lines of, we've seen this shift in trend. Those who had the short shorts in the 70s are thrilled. Why is this something that you have an affinity for? And he, honestly, I don't remember anything else that he said, except for the fact that he pulled his shorts up higher and then said on the mic to the fans, well, what do you guys think? And the crowd goes wild. And Tomas Mahach, who I am fairly sure not many people had heard from before that on-court interview who were in the stands that day, are now thinking this is the coolest guy with the best sense of humor, who also speaks great English, which again is something that I'm always impressed by, the fact that most of these people are doing this in their second language or third language. But that was a good example. So I think you have to take risks within reason. But I think most players, if you talk to them beforehand or if you have a chance to sort of ease them into it, most are game and they appreciate that, the element of trust and me coming to them beforehand. That's been my experience so far.
Right. That's a very professional approach too, because it's a fun-loving question, but you're approaching them beforehand. Like, I don't want to put you on blast, essentially. And we know no one really knew him because there's that Getty image photo that you saw. I'm sure you saw at Taste of Tennis at Indian Wells where it said Siniakova and guest show up.
Never forget. Yes. So
not anymore.
To me, not anymore. He is on the front lines of the short shorts movement, great personality, and really fun to watch play tennis. He's got a great fun game, a lot of variety, fun to watch. So what's not to love about Tomas Mahach?
Impressive. And every one of these young guys, whether it's Holger, him, a couple others, they take it as a personal challenge when another short shorts guy comes on the scene. So I don't know how short they plan on getting. I guess we'll find out. More with Blair Henley here on Tennis Channel Inside, and we're just bouncing around talking about her work in the tennis industry, some storylines. I do want to get back to the Billie Jean King Cup because you covering that tie. And just to touch on the Emma Navarro rap thing one more time, I don't want to keep bringing it up, but it is so cool to see for me. We were talking about, teams at the beginning of this, your college days, but the team roles, the team initiation, that was her rookie duties. And I think that's why team sports in any sport, especially tennis that doesn't have these opportunities, it's so special. And you see the players that want to be a part of this because there really isn't that chance to get the camaraderie and, fill those rookie duties like Emma did rapping.
Well, the backstory there is, so I'm hosting the welcome reception, and Hannah van de Winkel from Team Belgium she had prepared a speech in which she mentioned going on Tinder with the team, which was so hilarious and out of left field. So she was great also. Shout out to Hannah van de Winkel, who played great in her first match as well. But I was told via the script that I was going to be doing sort of a mini interview with Emma because she did not have anything prepared. So I had never met Emma before that welcome reception. She'd been on my court, but she hadn't won, so we hadn't done an interview before. So, introduced myself and said, I hear we're doing a mini interview up once you guys are up there in line. And she said, oh no, I've prepared something. I said, oh, this is news to me. That's great. I'd much rather have you do your thing than me have to, ask you some probably boring questions. And she, at that point, told me that it was indeed a wrap. The night before this welcome reception, had heard from Captain Lindsay Davenport that, it's tradition. Billie Jean King Cup rookies have to do a wrap. And she thought it was a joke. And then apparently it got brought back up on just before this bus ride to the welcome reception. And she's like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And it was so endearing and lovable and wonderful. And I just want to knock on the doors of anybody who criticizes that sort of thing and be like, what is wrong with you? This is so great. This is what tennis needs. This is why people go out and maybe cheer for her individually. Yes, you can cheer for her because she's an amazing competitor and a great tennis player, but this is what endears people to players. So props to her for going outside her comfort zone. She, after she won her first match, that was 2.5 hours. It was a grind. I think her arm was maybe not 100%, but after that match, in the post-match interview, she's like, well, I heard you guys play my rap on the video boards before I walked out, and it took me 1.5 sets to recover.
That's funny.
Which was another hilarious answer after 2.5 hours on the court. Per Taylor Townsend later on, apparently she was really bothered by that, and obviously we never ever want to put a player in a situation where they're not feeling great. To be clear, I don't make those decisions, but you never want a player to feel that way. But I would say to her, the entire crowd was into it and loved it. And I think overall it was fantastic.
Yeah, I'm also trying to figure out the correlation between now. This is like the second time you've been this close to a tennis player rapping. So I'm just going to put a pin in that one for future research. But no, I mean, yeah, Shapovalov, shout out to him. I do think, though, this team, I mean, we've talked about it before, how Lindsay Davenport's the perfect woman to lead this American squad. And you look at the talent, it's also, good to see these generations because this team has the veterans, Pagula and Keys now veterans on the team. And here comes Emma Navarro up as well, Dolehide and Townsend there. So it was good for America to get to this stage. They expected. I mean, it's fun loving. We all know it. Lindsay Davenport said, look, we expect to win this thing. That's a very professional championship level response that I wouldn't expect anything less from her.
I gotta tell you, I just happened to head into the media room. I was saying goodbye to some people at the end of the final day of play. And I was in the media room as Caroline Dolehide and Taylor Townsend were doing their press conference after winning the quote unquote dead rubber. And Lindsay was there as well. And one of the things that Taylor said about Lindsay was there was one point as they were on the bench on the changeover in that doubles match. And I didn't hear the exact scenario, but the gist was that Taylor asked Lindsay a strategic question about, I think it was maybe a volley angle or which way she should angle a volley when she coaches, something along those lines. And she said, Lindsay was like, I don't know. Like, I don't have that shot. I could only hit it one way. I don't know. And Taylor explaining why she thought that was fantastic. A coach had never said to her before, I don't know. Like, you feel it out. I trust you. I trust your ability. And I thought that was such a cool thing to hear from a player, to say, listen, she's obviously incredibly accomplished as a player and as a coach, and she's a tactician in every way. But sometimes that's what makes the best coaches, just that honesty in that moment and encouraging your player to trust themselves. And that's what happened there. And I thought that was just a really neat little story.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, she is as sharp a tennis mind as there is, but also just very direct and upfront. So I'm excited to see USA in the final. The only other Fed Cup story or Billie Jean King Cup story I wanted to bring up, Blair, and I know obviously you couldn't be in two places at once, but what stood out to me was, and this is a blast from somebody that has touched greatness and held on to it, but Emma Raducanu, what she did for Great Britain against France. I mean, winning 2 big matches against Garcia and Perry on clay. I know it's not quote unquote a tour level match, but this is as impressive, I think, Blair, as Emma, the other Emma now has looked. And I'm excited to see where she can build off of it. A much scrutinized player with some serious game.
I always feel like in those team competitions, and this is within reason, like if you have a really tough loss in the final of the finals, that's going to stick with you for a while. But if we're talking about the qualifying phase, if you have a loss to somebody excuse me, if you have a loss to somebody you wouldn't think that you would normally lose to, you can sort of shake that off. It's Billie Jean King Cup play. You're in a strange tennis scenario, and I feel like it's maybe easier to leave that in the past. I think if you have a good win in Billie Jean King Cup play or in team play, it can really propel you mentally in ways that other types of wins might not. So I'm hoping that's the case for Emma Raducanu. That was huge. You're exactly right.
Yeah, looking healthy now, especially. It's good to have her back in the mix. There's a lot of players to get back in the mix I wanted to discuss. Before we do that, Blair, I do have to mention, because you brought it up, talking about touching and being close to greatness, the discussion that you had with Andre Agassi. So I want to get some details of it. 45 minutes. First of all, I that's why you're a pro at this, because that is a lot of time to hold a conversation with such a legend of the sport. But first of all, that conversation, what exactly were the details? What was the speech? And what kind of a cool moment was it to go one-on-one with Andre?
Well, I was joined, which you couldn't tell. I had one picture, and it was from somebody that was sitting in the audience. This was part of the USTA national meetings. It was the closing session, and it was me and Dr. Brian Hainline, president and chairman of the USTA. So we were on either side of Andre on, no joke, Mitch, the biggest screens I've ever seen in my life. It was the biggest screen I can confidently say that I've ever personally occupied, with Andre right in the middle. But what I'll tell you though, because I had never met Andre before, and we were backstage beforehand, and he was just incredibly warm. And you know, when you've interviewed, and you know this, when you've interviewed enough people who are always wanting things from them, that is not always the case. They are not always asking, do you play tennis? Where are you from? That's not always happening. So incredibly warm. He actually walked up as I was getting mic'd up, and I'm like all wired up, and gave him a handshake. And then once I was fully mic'd, he then just gave me a hug. He's like, this is how I would have done it had you not had wires everywhere. Just really warm and lovely. And he's like, listen, if I go on too long, just like kick me. So just let me know that we need to move on a question. But in terms of actually moderating that discussion, it was very general, talking about why he is back in the public eye. And he attributes that to the fact that his kids are out of the house. Talking about his advice for juniors, his advice for tennis parents. We talked about his book a little bit, and how he famously said, I hate tennis with a dark and secret passion. And we talked about how his feelings on tennis have evolved since then. So it was a wide-ranging discussion. I didn't have to do much. Dr. Hainline didn't have to do much because he is a great storyteller. He's incredibly authentic, is probably the word that I would use. It's like he's connecting with you individually. There were probably, I don't know, 500-ish people in the room. And it's just like he's speaking into your soul. Like, this is the kind of person I need to give me a pep talk before I'm about to do something like really nerve-wracking or challenging, because he just, in a really calm way, is able to communicate on almost an individual level with people, even though it's this massive room with hundreds of people. So incredible experience. I think back to one of the biggest rounds of applause he got after something he said was when I asked, he obviously works with tons of kids. His foundation has done incredible things for education in Las Vegas and around the country. But I said, if one of those kids came up to you and said, Mr. Agassi, what's your best bit of advice for a junior tennis player? And he said, I'm not a big advice giver, but I would probably say that for me, I would value hard work and perseverance over any level of talent that you might have. Just put in the work. And it's, again, it's not earth shattering, but coming from someone who had the journey that he has had, it has an impact maybe beyond what it would normally if we're me telling an 11-year-old, work hard, it's going to be great. He was just really wonderful. And I think the fact that he is back in the tennis space is a massive win for tennis, and also perhaps pickleball, but mostly tennis.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Not dwell on that last line. But I do think, you answered the hypothesis. The question that I actually had written down was, why is he back in the public eye? And I thought maybe it is, the kids are getting older, there's more time, and he's come to terms. Being open and authentic is the perfect way to describe him. People do evolve with their feelings. They change over time. That book was still probably my favorite sports autobiography, and I've read a bunch of them because he was so open, pun intended. But I also think that his ability to talk shop, Blair, to talk about the game, is perennially underrated for all the flair, for all the outfits, everything that he brought to the game, which was amazing. He is underrated in the sense that he is such an analytical mind. A friend of mine outside the tennis space just brought up a little bit ago that Becker story, how he picked up the tell on his serve with the tongue going one way and how he could tell where it was going. And it's a great story. It's great intel, but it's also insight into one of the sharpest brains in all of tennis. So I'm glad, like a fan, like someone working it, I'm glad that it's back in the mix, that Andre's back in the space. We're all lucky to have that.
And it sounds like the U.S. Open is going to be Andre Central. One can only hope, but I think that's a possibility upcoming for those American fans.
It's 30, right? Is 94? Was that the year he won it? One of the years he won it?
Yes, that was the year he won it as an unseeded player. One of the things that that was actually funny. I listed, some U.S. Open memories. Debut in '86, beat Connors under the lights in '88, won it in '94, and he said, "You know so much about me." I was like, "That is part of my job." That's a great point. Great point, Mitch.
Well, it's great to see him, and I'll be looking forward to seeing him also at the owner's box at some of these Vegas Gold Knights games as well.
Yes.
As he's Vegas strong through and through. I want to wrap up here with Blair Henley on Tennis Channel Insight and talking about the big clay court event that we've got in Stuttgart. And I want to mention it because we made the transition. The guys had Monte Carlo last week, but the women hitting Stuttgart, and for such a loaded field, not a premier event, but everybody seems to want to play this event. It's always tough to transition, and yet we look at the numbers, Blair, and Iga going for a three-peat at Stuttgart, and the queen of everything on clay, 49-5 since the start of 2021 on the surface. Just a comfort level that many players don't have, because the transition is tough. But as far as we know, Iga is the best at handling this transition.
She sure is. And I could opine on the odds of her getting it done again in Stuttgart, but I would love to liken it to what I heard from so many players in Houston. Obviously, there are a lot of Americans there and people who are maybe not the most comfortable on clay. And sort of the version that they all have to tell me about the adjustment is they're trying to figure out how to play their game and to not lose the aggressive, usually it's that aggressive piece of their game at the expense of things having to work the point maybe a little bit more, having to have maybe a little bit more clearance on their shots. It's like how to keep their identity, even though it's on clay. And hearing that from a version of that from so many of those guys reminds me of how incredible it is that Iga can do what she does on almost every surface. Again, it's still incredibly high even on grass, but it just, maybe that's not her best surface yet. But it's amazing to me that she is able to keep her identity and do what she does regardless of the surface. I think that is really difficult and what is so amazing about watching her.
And for tennis nerds, the consistency across all the different tournaments on clay, whether it's altitude at Madrid, Stuttgart indoor, it doesn't matter. She's great on all of it. We know that. It was good to see, and I had it written down this morning, looking for the Ons Jabeur reset, did win against Alexandrova. So her best win in quite a while. Good to see that, playing doubles with Paula Badosa, which is fun as well. But an opportunity for Ons to have a reset, which is something that I think most in the sport would agree on would be good.
Yes, I think it's maybe the only thing that tennis can agree on right now. I think everybody in tennis could agree that an Ons reset would be a good thing. And those things that we can all agree on at the moment are few and far between. So hoping all the best things for Ons. And, as I'll never be able to think about clay season and just the possibilities of clay season the same again after Zizou Bergs in Houston. Yeah. Waxed poetic on Clay Siteman, ATP physio, when I asked, what are your thoughts? What's your relationship with clay? And he just decided to tell me about his relationship with clay, a person, the ATP physio. And so now anytime I think about clay season, at this moment that we're in, I think about Zizou, who, is doing great in the Challenger circuit, may even see him in Savannah, who knows? But it's a great season, the best season, Clay's season, if you will.
Clay season is the best. Yeah, you have Sabalenka back in the mix. Coco Gauff is looking for, as she said, a title before RG. She's been a great clay court player. I also want to mention, because I don't do enough shout outs to players that are making moves. We always, talk about the winners, but Linda Noskova, what she's been able to do, the teenager, she's already beaten Iga this year a couple of times, but the ability to notch another top 10 win the other day, and just her game, especially on that 10 to watch or next up list, she'd be pretty high on my list. Where another player, another player from that country that does well, they just produce them all, is the Czechia. So
is that not incredible? I mean, somebody needs to write a dissertation on how it's possible that a country the size of the Czech Republic can just churn out great players. I had somebody randomly messaged me on my website with what he thought his reasons were for this. And a lot of it is just the heritage there and the fact that tennis is passed down in a way that maybe it isn't in other countries. And they have that foundation in place, and hopefully things are stabilizing there in terms of the federation and all that good stuff. But yeah, props to Linda for just looking like she has ice in her veins. I'm so jealous. I was not a clutch tennis player at all. I'm really just not a clutch person at all. And I just envy those who can close it out when it matters. So props to Linda.
I have a 2-word hypothesis. I'm still working on it for what's going on, and it's Martina Navratilova. That's my theory. That's jump started everything. That's a special one. That's a special one to see. And off the court, just to kind of wrap up a few things here. We mentioned Iga, but Iga and Quinn Wen getting that Lancome deal just came down this week. Pretty special stuff, and pretty high end for both of them too. So props.
Secure that bag, girls. Good for you.
I know. It's great. I am sure Lee Na is happy to, Quinn Wen, she'll have to greet her when she sees her again. And look, Blair, I couldn't let you go without bringing up how we mentioned players that you're bringing personality out, people that we might not have known were funny and had this personality. You're the perfect hype woman for Barbora Krejcikova. because I was the same way. I didn't realize the personality was there. And then the most recent one with a stroller outside of her hotel room. It's the most hidden gem funny person I would say on tour is probably Barbora.
I'm so glad you brought this up. And for those who don't know the backstory, someone on Twitter, X, whatever, as a joke, posted that. Again, I'm not a proponent of posting fake things on Twitter, but somebody posted that Barbora was pregnant, and her coach/friend Pavel was the father. She responded to that and said, was there a picture? I don't even remember, but it was, sorry guys, sorry to disappoint. I only have one baby right now, and it's her dog Foxic.
Yeah.
And then apparently somebody left a stroller outside of her apartment. Is that what it looked like to you?
Yeah.
She
It might have been at the hotel or something, but yeah, then she quoted that response and circled back and said, "Is this your idea?"
Yes, were you guys the ones that did this? And she photoshops. Did she Photoshop herself and her dog?
I think I'd have to look back, but it's just too funny. It's just
she adds Pavel to the photoshopping. It was hysterical. Fans were going absolutely crazy because it was just iconic behavior. And shout out to Barbora, who, despite the fact that she was deathly ill in Miami, we met the morning that she left, and she gave me check candy and check wafers to bring home to my kids, which is one of the nicest things ever. So she's fantastic. And I know she was feeling good in terms of her tennis before she got sick. So I'm really hoping that heading into clay season, she's going to find that Barbora magic again.
I hope so too. Just been a blessing, especially online these last couple of years. Credit to yourself. Blair Henley, always fun. Do you have anything coming up we should know about here on the podcast? Be on the lookout for.
I'm going to be at the Savannah Challenger. Mike Cation was kind enough to vacate his position for a week so that I could come in and get some commentary reps. And all I have to say is, if Hollywood cares at all about authenticity, Zendaya should be at the Savannah Challenger. In the lead up, the release of Challengers is coming. Come on down. Zendaya has an open invitation to the Savannah Challenger. Apologies to the organizers. I have not asked their permission for this, but just if you really want to know what it's like at the Challenger, we got you covered.
Just shoot your shot with Zendaya. I love it. I love it on this platform, especially. And look, I just want a good tennis movie. I think we need one. It's been forever. I don't know that it's happened ever. So it'd be great.
When was the last good tennis movie? I don't know.
Yeah, it probably hasn't. So I'll reserve judgment when I see it. Blair Henley, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on the podcast. We know as far as, Wilson sponsored people go, it's Kostuke, Stearns, and Blair Henley. So thanks again for coming on the podcast. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Mitch.